The emergency klaxon screamed through the Mars Defense Command like the dying breath of humanity itself. Admiral Jack Morrison's weathered hands gripped the edge of the holographic display table, his knuckles white with tension as he watched. 30 massive alien vessels hang in Earth's orbit like predatory sharks circling wounded prey. Each obsidian hull gleamed with an otherworldly malevolence that made his stomach clench with dread. "Sir, incoming transmission from the lead vessel?" Lieutenant Kate Sullivan's voice cracked slightly, her usual military composure fracturing. Under the weight of what they were witnessing, she'd seen combat in the Martian mining wars, had faced down asteroid pirates without flinching. But this, this was different. This was the end of everything they'd ever known. Morrison straightened, his shoulders drawing on 30 years of military experience. The scars on his face told stories of vacuum exposure and laser burns, each one a testament to humanity's struggle to reach the stars. He'd fought tooth and nail to help establish the outer colonies, had watched children take their first steps. On alien soil, under foreign suns, some cosmic bureaucrat wanted to erase it all.
"Put it through," he commanded,
his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around him. Throughout the command center, junior officers frantically worked their stations, their faces pale with the realization that they were witnessing humanity's first contact with a truly superior alien. Civilization. The hologram materialized with a shimmer of exotic energy, and Morrison felt his breath catch in his throat. The creature before him was a towering nightmare of dark metal and pulsing energy conduits, its form constantly shifting between solid matter and living electricity. When it spoke, its voice resonated with the authority of 1,000 conquered worlds, each word dripping with the casual indifference of a god addressing insects. "I am Commander Vexther of the Hegemony Fleet. Your species has expanded beyond acceptable limits. You will abandon all colonies beyond your home system within 72 hours, or we will cleanse them ourselves." The words hit the command center like a physical blow. Morrison heard someone's coffee cup shatter against the floor, the sound unnaturally loud in the sudden silence. Around him, the greatest military minds of 3 worlds stood frozen, their tactical brilliance suddenly as useful as a stone knife against a fusion reactor. But then Captain Mike Rodriguez of the destroyer. Valiant stepped forward, his weathered face hard as asteroid rock. The old warrior had lost his left arm in the Belt Wars, had seen friends die in the cold vacuum of space. And something in his eyes suggested he'd rather join them than bow to this cosmic tyrant. "And if we refuse?" Rodriguez asked, his voice carrying the defiance of every human who'd ever stared into the void and chosen to venture forth anyway. The alien's form shimmered with what might have been amusement. "If beings of living metal could experience such emotions, then you join the 17 species we've already exterminated for their defiance." 17 species. The number hung in the air like a death sentence, each digit representing countless worlds reduced to cosmic dust.
Ow.
Morrison's mind raced, calculating the implications. If this hegemony had wiped out 17 entire civilizations, what chance did humanity have? They were barely 300 years removed from wooden sailing ships, still struggling to establish a foothold on a handful of worlds. The transmission cut abruptly, leaving only the sound of heavy breathing and the distant hum of life support. Systems. In that moment, every human in the command center felt the cold touch of extinction creeping up their spines. The universe had just revealed its true nature, not the romantic frontier of human dreams, but a charnel house ruled by beings who viewed genocide as administrative policy. Morrison turned to his communications officer, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Thompson, whose normally steady hands trembled slightly over her controls. "Send a message to all colonies," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of command forged in the Belt Wars. "Tell them to dig in deep and hold fast. And get me president." Williams on a secure channel. The next 3 hours transformed the Mars Defense Command into a hurricane of activity. Messages flashed between Earth, Mars, and the outer colonies at light speed, carrying humanity's first taste of truly existential terror. In the mining stations of the asteroid belt, hardened prospectors looked up at the stars with new eyes, knowing that death walked among them in ships of living darkness. On Europa, The ice farmers felt their children sleeping in pressure domes and wondered if they'd wake up to see another sunrise. The research stations on Titan, where humanity's brightest minds pushed the boundaries of science, suddenly found their work transformed from academic pursuit to desperate survival. But something else was happening too. Something the hegemony hadn't expected. As word spread through the colonies, a strange transformation began to take place. The scattered outposts of humanity, separated by millions of kilometers of hostile void, began to unite in ways they never had before. Old grudges between Mars and Earth suddenly seemed petty. The resource wars that had plagued the outer system for decades were forgotten in the face of species-wide extinction. President William's weathered face appeared on the secure channel, the weight of 3 worlds evident in his tired eyes. Behind him, the emergency session of the Global Defense Council was already in motion. Representatives from every human settlement, arguing with the passionate desperation of those who knew they were deciding the fate of their species. "Jack," William said quietly, "tell me, we have options." Morrison looked at the tactical display, where 30 alien ships hung like sword points aimed at humanity's heart. The math was simple. An brutally hegemony vessel outmassed the largest human ship by a factor of 10. Their weapons technology, centuries ahead of humanity's crude fusion torpedoes and magnetic accelerators. "We have one option, Mr. President," Morrison replied, his voice carrying the iron certainty of a man who'd made his choice. "We fight." The emergency session of the Global Defense Council lasted exactly 47 minutes. Representatives from Mars, Europa, Titan, and the asteroid colonies spoke with one voice for the first time in human history. The vote was unanimous. Humanity would not kneel as the session ended. Morrison stood alone on the observation deck, watching the alien fleet through the transparent aluminum viewport. The hegemony ships pulsed with malevolent energy there, biomechanical holes rippling like living tissue. They were beautiful in their own terrible way, masterpieces of destruction that had ended 17 civilizations. "They want a war," Morrison said to himself, his reflection ghostly in the viewport. Behind him, the command center buzzed with the controlled chaos of a species preparing for its final battle. "They'll get one, they'll never forget." But even as he spoke those defiant words, Morrison couldn't shake the feeling that humanity was about to learn why the universe belonged to the strong. The question wasn't whether they could win, it was whether they could make their extinction cost enough to matter. Just like how small investments compound over time to create massive wealth, humanity's scattered colonies were about to discover that unity and determination could compound into something far greater than the sum of their parts. Want to learn more about how the power of compounding can transform your life? Check out my next video where I break down the mathematics of exponential growth and how it applies to everything from financial success to personal development. The Battle of Titan began at 0400 hours, Seoul Standard Time, and Admiral Jack Morrison knew it would either be humanity's finest hour or their final epitaph. He stood on the bridge of the dreadnought Freedom, its hull scarred from a dozen previous conflicts like an old boxer's face, each dent and burn mark telling stories of survival against impossible odds. The ship had been his home for 15 years, through pirate raids and asteroid mining disputes. But nothing had prepared him for this moment. Around him, his crew worked with the desperate efficiency of those who knew they were humanity's last hope. The bridge hummed with barely controlled tension as officers called out status reports, their voices tight with the kind of fear that either breaks men or forges them into legends. Morrison had seen both types in his career, and today would reveal which kind of species humanity truly was. Hegemony fleet is moving into attack formation. It's called out Commander Lisa Park from the tactical station, her usual calm demeanor cracking as she processed the incoming data. 47 ships, sir? They're massive. Her voice carried the weight of someone who just realized that all their tactical simulations had been woefully inadequate. Morrison moved to the viewport, and what he saw there would haunt him for the rest of his life. The alien vessels moved like living nightmares. Through the void, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with malevolent energy that made the stars themselves seem to recoil. Each ship was the size of a small city, bristling with weapons that could crack planets like eggs. They moved with an organic grace that suggested they weren't just machines of war, but living entities that fed on destruction. But here's the thing. About humans, and maybe this is our greatest strength or our greatest weakness. We have this peculiar habit of cracking jokes when staring death in the face. From somewhere in the bridge crew, Morrison heard a nervous voice mutter, "Well, at least they're not insurance salesmen." The brief chuckle that rippled through the bridge was perhaps the most human sound in the galaxy at that moment. All ships. This is Morrison, the Admiral broadcast to his fleet, his voice carrying across the void to touch the hearts of every man and woman who'd volunteered to stand between Earth and extinction. Today we show these bastards what happens when you threaten human children. His words weren't just a battle cry, they were a promise. Covenant sealed in starlight and steel. The first salvo from the hegemony fleet tore through space like concentrated starlight. Beams of exotic energy that turned the vacuum itself into a weapon. The human destroyer Defiance was caught in the opening barrage, and Morrison watched in horror as the ship simply vanished. Vaporized in an instant by weapons that existed beyond human comprehension. 300 souls gone in a heartbeat. Their sacrifice written in fire across the cosmos. But if the hegemony expected humanity to crumble at this display of power, they had seriously underestimated the species that had clawed its way from cave paintings to starflight in less than 50,000 years. Captain Rodriguez's Valiant answered with a spread of nuclear missiles that bloomed like deadly flowers against an alien cruiser's shields, each warhead carrying the concentrated fury of a miniature sun. They're not invincible, Morrison realized. Watching the alien ship's barrier fluctuate under the assault, the revelation hit him like a physical blow. These cosmic gods could bleed. All ships concentrate fire on their shield generators. What followed was 6 hours of the most brutal space combat in human history. A dance of death performed against the backdrop of Saturn's rings. The hegemony ships moved with predatory grace, their weapons reaching out like the claws of some cosmic predator. But the humans fought with something the aliens had never encountered in their conquest of 17 species. The fury of cornered animals protecting their young, Commander Park's tactical display, became a constellation of chaos as human ships dove through the alien formation like angry hornets. The frigate Determination under Captain James Walsh executed a perfect torpedo run, its missiles threading through hegemony point defenses to strike a battleship's engine core. The explosion sent shockwaves through the alien fleet, proving that even giants could stumble. But the hegemony adapted quickly. Their biomechanical ships, learning from each engagement, the human cruiser Defiant Spirit found itself caught in a crossfire of energy beams that peeled away its armor like an onion. Captain Sarah Mitchell's last transmission was a defiant "Tell my daughter I love her" before her ship's fusion core detonated in a blaze of artificial starlight. The turning point came when Captain Emma Davis found her frigate relentless, crippled by alien fire, its engines dead and life support failing. Any sane commander would have ordered an evacuation, but Davis had grown up in the asteroid belt where giving up meant dying in the cold vacuum of space. She pointed her dying ship at the largest hegemony battleship and engaged her fusion cores. Emergency overload. The explosion lit up Titan's methane atmosphere like a second sun, the fireball expanding in perfect silence through the void. For a moment, human and alien alike were united in awe at the raw power unleashed by one woman's refusal to surrender. The hegemony battleship, massive as it was, cracked like an egg under the assault, its biomechanical hull bleeding exotic. Energies into space. Morrison felt tears streaming down his face as he watched Davis's sacrifice. She'd been 28 years old, mining engineer turned warrior who'd volunteered for this mission to protect her homeworld. Her death wasn't just a military loss, it was a reminder of what humanity was fighting for, what they were willing to sacrifice to remain free. The battle raged on with the merciless intensity of a cosmic storm. The human fleet, outnumbered and outgunned, fought with the desperate creativity that had carried their species from the African savanna to the stars. When conventional weapons failed, they improvised. When their ships were crippled, they rammed. When death seemed certain, they found ways to make it count. By the time Titan's dawn broke over the battlefield, the scene was one of devastation that would be remembered for millennia. Half the human fleet was debris scattered across the void like broken dreams. The survivors limped through the wreckage, their hulls scarred and their crews bloodied, but still flying the flag of defiance. But something unprecedented had happened. The hegemony, masters of 17 star systems, conquerors of countless worlds, had retreated. 4 of their mighty ships burned like funeral pyres against the starfield, monuments to human defiance that would be visible from Saturn's moons. For decades to come, Morrison stood among the wreckage of his fleet, watching the alien ships disappear into hyperspace. The cost had been terrible, thousands of good men and women reduced to cosmic dust. But they'd achieved something no species had managed in the hegemony's 1,000-year reign of terror. They'd made the conquerors bleed. "They'll be back," Morrison said quietly, his words carrying across the bridge like a prophecy. "And they'll bring friends." But as he spoke, Morrison realized something else. Just as compound interest turns small investments into massive wealth over time, humanity's courage was beginning to compound into something far greater than the sum of its parts. Each act of defiance, each moment of sacrifice was building toward something that would shake the galaxy to its foundations. Want to discover how the power of compounding can transform your own life? Check out my next video where I reveal the mathematical secrets that can turn small daily actions into extraordinary results over time. The hegemony's response came like a plague of locusts descending upon a defenseless harvest. 300 ships materialized at the edge of the solar system in a display of raw power that made humanity's previous victory at Titan seem like a child's tantrum against a hurricane. Their dark holes blotted out entire constellations, each vessel a monument to the kind of overwhelming force that had crushed 17 civilizations before turning its attention to Earth. Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the rebuilt Freedom, its new armor gleaming under the harsh light of Sol. The ship had been reconstructed in record time, every rivet and circuit board infused with the desperate hope of a species that had tasted both victory and the terrible cost of defiance. Through the viewport, he watched humanity's homeworld turn slowly in the void, its blue marble surface innocent of the death that approached from the darkness between stars. The weight of 3 billion souls pressed down on Morrison's shoulders like a physical force. Every man, woman, and child on Earth was looking to him for salvation, and he knew with crystalline clarity that conventional tactics would fail. The hegemony had brought enough firepower to sterilize every planet in the solar system, turning humanity's cradle into a cosmic graveyard. "Citizens of Earth," Morrison broadcast to the billions watching below, his voice carrying across every communication channel from the ice mines of Antarctica to the orbital habitats circling the planet. "They've come to end us, to silence our voice forever. But they've made one mistake. They've given us something to fight for." His words rippled through the global consciousness like stones thrown into still water. In corporate boardrooms and factory floors, in schools and hospitals, in the slums of Mumbai and the penthouses of New York, humanity heard the call and felt something ancient stirring in their collective soul. The same force that had driven their ancestors from the African savanna to conquer an entire world was awakening once again. The siege began with surgical precision that would have made a master surgeon weep with envy. Orbital platforms died, in flashes of exotic energy, their debris raining down on Earth's atmosphere like falling stars. The Luna shipyards, pride of human engineering, became expanding clouds of twisted metal and shattered dreams. Each strike was calculated to maximize psychological impact while minimizing the risk of turning Earth into an uninhabitable wasteland. But you know what they say about the best-laid plans of mice and Galactic conquerors. Sometimes the universe has a sense of humor. The hegemony had studied 17 species, analyzed their weaknesses, and developed tactics that had never failed. What they hadn't counted on was the sheer, bloody-minded stubbornness of a species that had spent millennia fighting wars against impossible odds and somehow winning anyway. As the alien fleet pressed inward toward Earth, something unexpected happened. The solar system, which had seemed so defenseless against this cosmic armada, began to fight back with the fury of a cornered animal. From the asteroid belt came the miners' rough men and women, like Tom Bradley and Maria Santos, who'd carved lives from airless rock and knew every hiding place in the system better than their own names. Their ships were ugly, functional things that looked like flying junkyards compared to the sleek elegance of hegemony vessels. But Bradley and his crew had spent decades dodging corporate security and claim jumpers, learning to strike from the shadows and vanish before retaliation could find them. They emerged from the belt's endless maze like vengeful ghosts, ramming fusion charges into hegemony holes before disappearing back into the tumbling chaos of ice and rock. From Mars came the colonists, led by Governor Robert Chen, a man who'd spent his entire political career fighting for colonial independence and now found himself commanding humanity's most desperate stand. The atmospheric processors that had slowly transformed Mars into a garden world became massive railguns, their magnetic coils repurposed to hurl projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Each shot was a desperate prayer hurled into the void, carrying with it the hopes and dreams of an entire world. Sometimes those prayers found their mark. Punching through alien armor like the fist of an angry god, the hegemony cruiser Dominion's End learned this lesson the hard way. When a Martian railgun slug tore through its biomechanical hull, sending exotic energies cascading through its internal systems, the ship died in a cascade of secondary explosions that lit up the Martian sky like a second sun. But perhaps the most terrifying development for the hegemony came from Europa's ice cities, where Captain Jennifer Walsh commanded the deep space construction crews. These were men and women who'd spent their lives working in the vacuum of space, bodies adapted to zero gravity, and their minds trained to think in 3 dimensions. When conventional weapons failed, they did what humans had always done. They improvised. Walsh's crews boarded alien vessels in the darkness between worlds. Fighting with laser cutters and mining explosives in corridors never meant for human feet. Every boarding action was a suicide mission, but they went anyway. Driven by the same force that had compelled their ancestors to charge machine gun nests and storm fortress walls, they carried with them the desperate knowledge that failure meant extinction, not just for themselves, but for everyone they'd ever loved. The hegemony found themselves facing something unprecedented in their 1,000-year history enemy that refused to acknowledge defeat. Each time they destroyed a human ship, 2 more emerged from the system's countless hiding places. Each time they eliminated a defensive position, the humans simply adapted and found new ways to strike back. The siege lasted for months, and with each passing day, the psychological impact on the hegemony fleet grew more severe. These were beings who'd conquered 17 civilizations through overwhelming displays of force, expecting quick capitulation in the face of superior technology. Instead, they found themselves bleeding slowly in humanity's heartland. Each advance paid for in alien blood and twisted metal. Commander Vexter, the same alien who delivered the original ultimatum, found his confidence eroding like a sandcastle. Before the tide, his reports to the hegemony high command grew, increasingly desperate as human resistance not only persisted, but seemed to grow stronger with each passing week. The primitive species that should have been crushed in days was instead teaching the galaxy's supreme military force hard lessons about the difference between conquest and extermination. When the retreat order finally came, transmitted across subspace from the hegemony's capital world, it carried with it the weight of unprecedented failure. The masters of 17 star systems, conquerors of countless worlds, were withdrawing from a backwater system defended by a species that had barely learned to leave its own planet. The hegemony had learned a terrible truth about humanity. They didn't just fight for territory or resources. They fought for the very right to exist, and that made them more dangerous than any weapon or technology. Like compound interest, turning small investments into massive wealth over time, humanity's refusal to surrender had compounded into something that shook the foundations of galactic civilization. Want to discover how the power of compounding can transform your own life in ways that seem impossible? Check out my next video, where I reveal the mathematical secrets that can turn small daily actions into extraordinary results that will amaze even your enemies. 18 months after the siege that nearly ended humanity, Admiral Morrison stood on the bridge of the new super dreadnought Retribution, and the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. The ship was a monument to human engineering, angular, aggressive, built for one purpose: war. But it was also something more. It was proof that a species written off as primitive could not only survive, but evolve in ways that defied every law of galactic politics. The Retribution wasn't just larger than its predecessor, it was fundamentally different. Human engineers had studied captured hegemony technology, not to copy it, but to understand it and then surpass it. The ship's hull incorporated biomechanical elements stripped from destroyed alien vessels, creating a hybrid that pulsed with both human determination and alien efficiency. It was, in many ways, the physical manifestation of humanity's refusal to accept the limitations others had placed upon them. Hegemony garrison at Proxima Centauri is surrendering, reported Captain David Kim from the communications station, his voice carrying a mix of satisfaction and disbelief. Kim had lost his brother in the siege of Earth. The irony wasn't lost on him. He was now accepting surrender from the same species that had once demanded humanity's extinction. "They're requesting terms, sir." "Tick, sir." Morrison studied the tactical display with the cold precision of a surgeon examining a patient. The alien base on Proxima Centauri B was sophisticated, its biomechanical structures growing from the planet's surface like metallic cancer. For decades, this outpost had served as the hegemony's forward operating base, a dagger pointed at humanity's heart. But it was also isolated, cut off from reinforcement by humanity's growing fleet. And its defenders knew they were facing an enemy that had learned to match their technology with something far more dangerous: righteous fury. The Admiral's response came without hesitation, each word carrying the weight of every human life lost in the hegemony's campaign of terror. "No terms," he said quietly, his voice cutting through the bridge's ambient noise like a blade through silk. "They showed our colonies no mercy. They get none from us." The bombardment lasted 8 hours, and it was a masterpiece of controlled destruction. Human gunners, many of whom had learned their trade in the asteroid belt's mining operations, placed their shots with surgical precision. Each blast was calculated not just to destroy, but to send a message that would ripple across the galaxy. Humanity had moved beyond mere survival and entered the realm of conquest. But here's where the story gets interesting, because what happened next wasn't what anyone expected. You might think that after months of brutal warfare, humanity would simply replace the hegemony with their own version of galactic tyranny. After all, that's what usually happens when the oppressed become the oppressors, right? But humans have this peculiar habit of surprising even themselves. When the smoke cleared over Proxima Centauri B, the first human colony world was free. But this was more than military victory. It was a transformation that would reshape the galaxy itself. In the hydroponics bays of human ships, Earth plants grew beside specimens from a dozen liberated worlds, their roots intertwining in ways that seemed to symbolize something larger. In the workshops, human engineers worked alongside former hegemony, slave species that had been conquered so long ago they'd forgotten their own names. The Terran Empire was being born in the fire of war. It was becoming something the galaxy had never seen. A multi-species alliance held together not by fear or superior technology, but by the radical human concept of individual freedom. Was an idea so alien to galactic civilization that most species initially couldn't even comprehend it. Freedom as a birthright rather than a privilege. The concept was literally inconceivable to beings who'd lived under the hegemony's boot for centuries. Morrison walked through the ship's corridors, observing this transformation firsthand. In the medical bay, human doctors worked alongside crystalline beings whose knowledge of biomechanical healing far exceeded anything Earth had produced. In the engineering sections, former hegemony technicians shared secrets that had been jealously guarded for millennia, their gratitude for liberation, overcoming centuries of indoctrination. "Admiral," came a voice from the communications array, interrupting his contemplation. It was Ambassador Kethprim of the Andromedans, a species that had been hegemony vassals for 2 centuries. Elays, their homeworld, had been one of the first to fall. to the alien empire and their culture had been systematically erased until they existed only as tools of their conquerors. The Rigel system wishes to join your empire. They've driven out the hegemony garrison themselves. Morrison nodded slowly, processing the implications. The war was changing in ways that military strategists would study for generations. It was no longer about human survival. It was about the survival of freedom itself. Each victory wasn't just liberating worlds. It was liberating minds, awakening species to possibilities they'd never imagined. The bridge crew around him represented this transformation. Commander Park, his tactical officer, worked alongside a former hegemony navigation specialist whose tentacled form moved with fluid grace over alien controls. Captain Rodriguez, promoted after his heroic actions at Titan, consulted with a crystalline being whose race had been enslaved before humanity had even discovered fire. They were becoming something new, not just a military force, but a living example of what the galaxy could become. Through the viewports of the Retribution stars, wheeled in their ancient patterns, but now they looked down on something unprecedented in galactic history. An empire built not on conquest, but on the radical idea that all thinking beings deserve the right to choose their own destiny. It was a concept so revolutionary that it threatened to unravel the very foundations of galactic civilization. The reports flooding in from across the galaxy told a story that would have seemed impossible just months before. On Vega 3, a mining world that had served the hegemony for 3 centuries, the enslaved population had risen in revolt. On the industrial worlds of the Centauri cluster, factory workers were laying down their tools and demanding something. Their species had never known the right to determine their own fate. Each victory, each liberated world, species that chose freedom over servitude was like compound interest, building toward an inevitable conclusion. The hegemony's 1,000-year reign was crumbling not because humanity had superior weapons, but because they had introduced something far more dangerous: hope. Morrison stood at the center of this transformation, watching as his bridge crew coordinated liberation efforts across a dozen star systems. The boy who'd joined the military to escape the poverty of Earth's slums had become the architect of galactic revolution. But he knew the real victory wasn't in the battles won or the worlds freed. It was in the idea that was spreading like wildfire through the galaxy. The idea that freedom wasn't something to be granted by the powerful, but something to be seized by the courageous. Just as small investments compound into massive wealth over time, small acts of defiance were compounding into galactic revolution. Want to discover how the power of compounding can transform your own life in ways that seem impossible? Check out my next video where I reveal the mathematical secrets that can turn small, daily actions into extraordinary results that will reshape your destiny. 5 years after the first ultimatum that should have ended humanity forever, Admiral Morrison, now Supreme Commander of the Terran Imperial Navy, stood in the ruins of the hegemony's capital world. And the irony wasn't lost on him that he was breathing alien air on a planet that had once considered Earth nothing more than a minor inconvenience to be erased. The biomechanical cities that had once ruled 1,000 star systems lay shattered around him, their dark spires silent against the alien sky like the broken teeth of some cosmic predator. The journey to this moment had cost humanity everything, and given them the universe in return. Morrison's reflection in the shattered crystal of a fallen hegemony tower showed a man aged beyond his years, his hair now silver, his face lined with the weight of decisions that had shaped the fate of entire civilizations. But his eyes still burned with the same fire that had carried him through the siege of Earth and the liberation of Proxima Centauri. Before him knelt the last of the hegemony's high command, their forms flickering with defeat like dying stars. These beings had once commanded fleets that could sterilize planets, had spoken with voices that carried the authority of absolute power across 1,000,000 worlds. Now they trembled before a species they'd dismissed as primitive savages barely worthy of extinction. Around them, representatives from 200 species waited in the shadow of human warships, their varied forms a testament to the galaxy's incredible diversity. Beings of crystal and flame, of metal and living energy, of pure thought and crystallized time, watching to see what humanity would do with victory. The easy path would be to become what the hegemony had been, to rule through fear and superior technology, to transform from liberators into the next generation of cosmic tyrants. The galactic hegemony formally surrenders, spoke Vexter, the same commander who had delivered that first ultimatum to Earth 5 years ago. His voice, once resonant with the authority of 1,000 conquered worlds, now carried the hollow echo of absolute defeat. We underestimated your species' capacity for unity. Unity. The word hung in the alien air like a revelation. The hegemony had studied 17 species before humanity, had analyzed their military capabilities, their technological potential, their social structures, but they'd never encountered a species that could transform individual courage into collective determination, that could turn the bonds between strangers into something stronger than any weapon. Morrison looked out at the assembled representatives, feeling the weight of galactic history pressing down on his shoulders. Every decision made in the next few minutes would echo through the centuries, shaping the destiny of countless beings yet unborn. He could feel the expectations radiating from the crowd, some hoping for mercy, others expecting the cycle of oppression to simply change hands. But here's where humanity did something that absolutely no one saw coming. You'd think after years of brutal warfare, after watching friends die in the vacuum of space, after seeing entire worlds reduced to ash, that the victors would want their pound of flesh, right? It's certainly what galactic history suggested would happen. The hegemony's dissolved, Morrison announced, his words broadcast across the galaxy through quantum communicators that carried his voice to every inhabited world in real time. In its place, we established the Terran Republica, Federation of Free Worlds bound by mutual defense and shared prosperity. The silence that followed was so complete, it seemed to bend the laws of physics. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had known only servitude for centuries tried to process concepts their languages didn't even have words for. Democracy, self-determination, individual rights. These weren't just foreign ideas, they were revolutionary concepts that threatened to overturn the natural order of galactic civilization. Vexter's form pulsed with confusion that would have been comical if it weren't so profound. You're not going to rule us? The question carried the bewilderment of a being whose entire existence had been defined by hierarchical power structures, who literally couldn't conceive of a universe where strength didn't automatically confer dominion. No, Morrison said firmly, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who'd learned that true power came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to restrain that ability. We're going to do something the galaxy has never seen. We're going to govern ourselves. The transformation didn't happen overnight, because changing the fundamental nature of galactic civilization turned out to be slightly more complicated than winning a war. It took decades to establish the Republic's institutions, to create a government that could represent species whose thinking was as alien as their biology. How do you design a voting system that works for beings of pure energy who experience time differently than organic species? How do you write laws that apply equally to hive minds and individuals, to immortal crystals and short-lived biological entities? But humanity had learned something profound in their first galactic war. The strongest empires weren't built on conquest, but on the voluntary association of free beings. Every challenge, every seemingly impossible problem of governance, was solved not by human ingenuity alone, but by the collective wisdom of species working together as equals for the first time in galactic history. President Williams is now aged, but still sharp as a laser cutter, stood before the first Galactic Senate in a moment that would be remembered as long as stars burned in the void. The chamber was a marvel of cooperative engineering, its architecture accommodating representatives from 1,000 worlds, beings of every conceivable form, united by a single revolutionary idea that freedom was worth fighting for. Today, Williams declared, his voice carrying across the chamber to beings who breathed methane and others who existed as pure thought, we prove that even the smallest species can change the course of galactic history if they fight not just for survival, but for the values that make survival worthwhile. The applause that followed wasn't human applause. It was a symphony of sounds and energies as diverse as the galaxy itself. Crystalline beings chimed like wind through temple bells. Energy creatures pulsed with harmonious frequencies. An organic species from 100 worlds added their voices to a chorus of hope that had never been heard before. The galaxy was vast, stretching across billions of light years and containing wonders that defied imagination. There would be other threats, other wars, other challenges that would test the Republic's resolve. But now, there was something new among the stars, something that burned brighter than any sun. The idea that any being, no matter how strange or different, deserved the right to forge their own destiny. Humanity had given the galaxy its greatest gift, not technology or military might, though those had been necessary tools, but the radical notion that freedom was a birthright, not a privilege to be earned through submission to superior force. It was an idea that would outlive stars, that would carry civilizations through dark ages and golden eras alike. The Terran Republic endured, a beacon of hope in the cosmic dark, proving that courage and unity could overcome any tyranny. And just as compound interest transforms small investments into massive wealth over time, the small act of choosing freedom over domination had compounded into something that transformed the entire well. Galaxy want to discover how the power of compounding can transform your own life in ways that seem impossible? Check out my next video where I reveal the mathematical secrets that can turn small daily actions into extraordinary results that will reshape your destiny and legacy.